As we move on into this next segment about following Jesus on the road to Jerusalem, I want to go back and pick up two things that we didn't spend a whole lot of time on in the last segment. And one of those is, as you're introduced to Jesus in the Gospels, one of the first things you see him doing is calling certain men to follow him. Now, there are women as well, but he chooses certain men that he wants to be his own. We know these as the 12. This would be guys like Simon and Andrew, James and John, Matthew, various other guys as you go and you read these stories. Now, if you would want to go and look at this, you could look at this in the Gospel of Mark in the 3rd chapter, where he chooses 12. He calls them apostles, and Jesus wanted to train these men to go out and do the kinds of things that he was doing, casting out demons, preaching, teaching, healing, these sorts of things. But what I love about what the Gospel of Mark says in Mark chapter 3 is that he chose these guys first and foremost so that they might be with him and that he might send them out. And so Jesus' method of discipling these men was first and foremost that they would be with him, that they would be able to see him and hear him and talk with him and ask him questions. And so even in the text that we were just in the Gospel of John not too long ago, in John chapter 6, you remember Jesus gathers this massive crowd of people and he feeds them. He gives to the disciples, to the 12, they go out and they distribute the food to the many disciples, and they just keep coming back to Jesus, getting more. They keep taking it out to the crowds. And then Jesus, the next day, preaches his most challenging message, right? Where he basically says things in such a way about eating his flesh, drinking his blood, that it causes many, many people who are not really with him to stumble and to leave. And in that very text, in John chapter 6, towards the end, Jesus looks at his smaller group of disciples after many had turned back. And Jesus says to the 12, this is in John 6:67, "Do you want to go away as well?" And Simon Peter, who often speaks on behalf of the group, answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." And this is a great answer. If you read Peter's life, Simon Peter's life, most things he says aren't good, but this, he nailed it. Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life. And so though all of these other people are leaving, no longer following behind Jesus, these men stick with him. They know he has the words of life, and they're not going anywhere. So that's one of the things as we keep following Jesus, especially now on this path to Jerusalem where he's setting his sights. He's got a group with him that love him and that have left everything for him. And he has things he wants to teach them along the way on the path to Jerusalem. The other thing that I want to go back to is in John chapter 10, which we just looked at with the Good Shepherd. And Jesus says in John 10:14, "I'm the Good Shepherd." Verse 16, he says, "I have other sheep." I mentioned that this is probably talking not just about, I don't just have other Jews that I'm trying to gather, but I have many other sheep from other nations that I want to gather. But Jesus talks in that text about how he's going to lay down his life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. When Jesus says that he will lay down his life for the sheep, what exactly does that mean? What do you picture? And why would he do that? And how would that help? Is that just him saying, I would protect these sheep to the point of death? Or is he saying, I am going to lay down my life for them, for something good for them? Not just to protect them from enemies, like just maybe a statement that I would do anything for them, but he seems to be saying, I will lay down my life for them. And how is that going to help them? And when he says I have the authority to do that, and I have the authority to take it back up again, we already saw that people didn't understand what he was saying. What do you think he means by that? And how would we know that he has the authority over death and life? What would he need to do to be able to demonstrate he's got that kind of authority? I mean, how can anyone trust a claim like that? Well, we come into John chapter 11, and immediately we find that one of Jesus' close friends, not one of the 12, but a very close friend of his, is very ill. Now let's read the text. John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany. A certain man, to us sounds like, hey, this guy is just a random person, but it's just, we haven't heard of him up to this point, but we're going to find out Jesus actually knows this guy really well. He was in the village of Mary and her sister Martha, and it was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her. So not Mary, Jesus' mother, but another Mary, a close friend. And it was Mary whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters, Mary and Martha, sent to Jesus, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Okay, so after setting the scene, the writer, John, now tells us something that kind of breaks up the story. And this is something you always have to pay attention to when you're reading. When the author is telling a story and then he kind of interjects a comment that he wants you to pay attention to, because maybe it's some added detail or something he thinks you really need to know to be able to make sense of this story, or so you don't misunderstand it. This is in John 11, verse 5. He tells the readers now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now, why would John feel like we needed to know that right here? It's because of what we read in the next verse, verse 6. So when Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. So they said, Lord, the one that you love, our brother, is so sick. Please come right away. John says, now listen, Jesus really does love this family. Back to the story. So he stayed 2 days longer where he was. Now, why does he do that? Well, as we read on, it becomes apparent that he's doing this to make sure Lazarus dies and is dead for a while. So maybe John's comment that Jesus really did love this family is a little more important, because that doesn't seem like the loving thing to do. But then Jesus decides to go down to, he would say, to wake up Lazarus. But then the disciples are like, well, Master, if he's sleeping, then he's going to feel better, because he told him he's asleep. But Jesus says plainly then, Lazarus is dead. And that's something you can pay attention to for the disciples. Whenever Jesus speaks in metaphors, pictures, like he's sleeping, they often interpret it literally and completely misunderstand him. And whenever he speaks literally, they often think he's speaking figuratively. This is kind of the story with the disciples. Well, in any event, if you remember from John 10, Jesus said he has authority to lay down his life and take it up again. He's also able to secure eternal life for all of his sheep. Well, one of his sheep has died in the next chapter. So Jesus comes down to Bethany. He finds two sisters struggling over the loss of their brother, Lazarus. And they're struggling also seemingly with why Jesus didn't come right away. Because if you read through this story in John 11, you'll see that Martha and then Mary say the exact same phrase to Jesus. They say, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I think there's some implicit rebuke there, or they're challenging Jesus a bit. They're saying, Lord, if you had been here, like, why weren't you here? Where were you? Because I know if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Well, Jesus tells Martha, your brother will rise again. Martha responds, I know he will someday in the resurrection. Like she's thinking, I know he will. On the last day, he will be raised up. But then look at John 11:25. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. And whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? That's the way that is written. That jumps right out of the pages. I mean, he is saying that to a grieving sister But the way it's written, it's like he's saying that to us. Do you believe this? How about you? Do you? Well, Jesus goes to the place where Lazarus is laid. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days because Jesus delayed so long. His body stinks. His body is going to rot in the tomb. But Jesus makes them take away the stone. They probably don't want to do that. You can read through the story. You have the shortest verse in the Bible here as well, where it says, Jesus wept. Jesus shed tears over this horrible situation, over his friends. Lazarus has died. The sisters are grieving. The consequences of sin, of being in a broken world, of having someone you love die, all of these things. Jesus weeps. But he tells them to get the stone away. Eventually they do it. And then Jesus calls out, Lazarus, come forth. He calls into a tomb, to a dead man, to come out of the tomb. And Lazarus, the dead man, is alive. It's like his words speak life into the dead. It's like Jesus has breathed out life into a dead corpse. It's like he has brought something back into existence that seemed to no longer exist. It is like this man has the authority over life and death. And perhaps this should remind us that when Jesus says in John 10, I have the authority to lay down my life, and I have the authority to take my life back again. Maybe he really does. I think the question is, do you believe that he does?